Hello and happy St. Patrick's Day, at least on the day that I'm filming this, and hopefully on the day that you are watching this. I have a cup of tea and a couple of biscuits, and let's get started on this video essay. So I thought today, being St. Patrick's Day, would be the perfect day to discuss something that I and many others have noticed, and that is just how good Irish writers are. I actually have a video that I put up last week of my top 10 favourite books by Irish authors, and I think I have an earlier one that I published a few years ago as well. So if you want to go and check those out after this video, of course. Good writing is, of course, subjective. There may be people who don't like any of the books that they've read by Irish authors, and there are definitely Irish authors that I have read and did not get on with. But it would be hard to deny that writers from Ireland seem to be particularly successful. For an island of just over 7 million people, or about half the population of the Greater London area, they definitely seem to be punching above their weight, with 4 Nobel laureates and 6 Booker Prize winners. In 2023, half of the Booker Prize shortlist was Irish, and at least one Irish author has appeared on the longlist for 16 of the last 20 Booker Prizes, with many years, of course, featuring more than one. We all know the stalwarts like Colm Tóibín and Roddy Doyle and Enright, and those are joined by many new writers such as Megan Nolan, Colin Walsh and Naoise Dolan, and of course the literary it girl Sally Rooney. But it's not just in literary fiction where the Irish are successful, as authors such as Marian Keyes, Maeve Binchy and Liz Nugent attest. The Irish can write genre fiction as well. And of course this isn't even a new phenomenon, although many of the well-known classics like Oscar Wilde and W.B. Yeats were Anglo-Irish, and one of the famous classic Irish writers has some works that are almost intelligible, in Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. But I did wonder what it is about Irish writers that make them such successful storytellers. I normally like to back up my essays with stats and figures, but with a concept such as good writers and a question of why they are good, that is harder to explain with data. So this is going to be more of a vibes-based video essay, and I hope you will go along with me. I am always interested in mythology of place, the ideas that people tell themselves that help to create a sense of national identity. And it seems that one of the foundation ideas of Irishness is as a nation of storytellers. There used to be a class of people in Ireland called the Seanachie. Originally this was a servant who kept the details of like the genealogy and the laws and the annals and other such important information. But after the destruction of much of Irish culture in the 1600s, it became associated with storytellers from the lower classes. This tradition of oral storytelling as part of the culture is something that is explored in many books, including, for example, The Giant O'Brien by Hilary Mantel, who is a writer of Irish heritage. That book, the main character in that book is a Seanachie. And this tradition of oral storytelling has continued into a more modern conception of Irishness as well, from touristic tales such as kissing the Blarney Stone to get the gift of the gab, to an identification with the art of telling stories. As Rashers Tierney once said, "The Irish way of telling a story is a complex and elaborate one, complete with wild exaggerations, a certain delight in improbable fantasy, and a heightened sense of drama." Or critic Nicole Flattery, "Whenever I go out with a group of friends I haven't seen in a while, everyone's primed to be like, 'Wait till I tell you,' and has a story." While not all Irish people are talkers who can spin a tale, there is a certain emphasis put on this idea culturally, and so perhaps Irish people have more practice in telling stories because it is both expected of and familiar to them. This idea is only further bolstered by the constellation of Irish literary stars from history. Mentioned up top like Wilde, Joyce and Yeats, along with Bram Stoker, George Bernard Shaw and Iris Murdoch. Of course, all countries have a literary canon, whether that's Shakespeare, Molière, Garcia Marquez. But when this famous canon continues on through Anne Enright and Seamus Heaney and is linked back to a mythology of nationhood that is connected with this idea of telling stories, it gains a weight that may not exist in some other national myths. Now, this idea of national myths, all nations have a myth. The Irish are not unique in this, and it's not a negative thing either. It's not a country lying about itself. It's more that when you are building a nation, it is necessary to have an idea of what that nation is beyond the simple fact of borders. We all know how easy it is to divide people who live in the same geography. And so in order to build a nation, you have to build an idea of we are a people like this. And an idea that has firm roots in reality is preferable. So the Irish myth of a nation of storytellers is not unique, but it is necessary to some of the other things that I'm going to discuss about why I think Irish writers are so good. Because one of the other major parts of Irish national identity is that of a nation under siege. 800 years of oppression is a common refrain, as well as Britain or England's first colony. And this oppression and colonisation led to the loss and destruction of a culture and of a language. Today, Irish is spoken regularly by as few as 195,000 people, but it was the first language of the majority of the country until the 19th century. As Christopher Morash, the inaugural Seamus Heaney Professor of Irish Writing at Trinity College, I couldn't get that right without looking at it, says, "There is a sense that Irish history is a fractured history, a broken history." Some have argued that with the loss of the Irish tongue and the tradition of oral storytelling, the Irish had to learn to express themselves in an alien language and build a culture anew. This explains perhaps the profusion of 19th century authors, building a literary canon for a country that does not already have one. Though the reason I mentioned that most of them were Anglo-Irish is because that means that most of their forebearers did not speak Irish. William Butler Yeats said that the Ireland of his day is like a ball of soft wax. It's here, ready to be remade. Morris says, "It's almost that sense that there was a lost ancient past, and so now you have to remake the present in some new way." Ronan MacDonald, who holds the Jerry Higgins Chair in Irish Studies at the University of Melbourne, believes that the rapid uptake of English in Ireland created a sense of literary restlessness. But while the Irish language itself was lost as a primary means of expression for the majority of Irish people, it left its mark on the English used on the island, a dialect often known as Hiberno-English. This section may be more an example of personal preference, because the effect that Irish had on the way the Irish speak English is a specific way of talking that to some readers may be very appealing, but may turn others off. As Louise Kennedy said, "When Irish people were losing their own language, they weren't given formal lessons in English, and they applied the new words to Irish grammatical structures, which were quite different." This concept is known by linguists as relexification. Examples of this alien grammatical structure are things such as preferring nominal to verbal structures. Instead of saying "fill it up," saying "give me the fill of it." Instead of "he died," "he got his death." Also an overuse of the definite article. The both of them have work to do, but the two parishes were the one, parched with the thirst. Or the use of the word "after," which is known as the tense called the after perfect, meaning that something has just happened. "Would you just wait? I'm only after getting here." It is my belief that this way of writing that is both unfamiliar to but comprehensible by most Anglo readers gives dialogue a sense of the poetic that doesn't exist in standard English. Poets are always upturning words, making unusual compound verbs or using gerunds and things in interesting ways, creating rhythm and a subtle meaning that already exists naturally in Hiberno-English. The rhythm of Hiberno-English is different from standard English, and this creates a tension in the non-Irish reader of Irish written texts. And this tension is where pleasure is found. This is something that people who move to Ireland have expressed about the way of talking in the country. As British journalist Alex Clark said in The Guardian, "It was more that the day-to-day conversation seemed to be more vivid and unexpected than I was used to. An electrician arrived in the middle of a kitchen renovation and inspected the chaos. 'You're all asunder,' he said to me gravely." And the same can be said of this clip from an Irish podcast containing an excellent use of the word "thee."
Swan would be hard to do. The neck theory might work, but that's a feathered beast. If the wind's in your favour, throw away, sir. Yeah. If the wind's against thee...
In addition to this use of dialect, Irish culture is, unlike most Anglo cultures, a high context culture. High context cultures are one in which context is super important for communication. Things aren't stated directly and messages exchanged are implicit rather than explicit. Examples include places like Japan and Finland, as well as Ireland. And this is contrasted with more direct cultures such as the USA and the Netherlands, for example. There are often implicit meanings in things that Irish people are saying, and silences can be just as important. As author Lisa McInerney said, "Irish people don't take anything too seriously, and at the same time we can be very, very guarded. So there's a lot of irony and sarcasm and implication and saying one thing but meaning another." Another commenter mentioned that whilst the Irish will spin tales, there is often nothing said in a lot of words, and all of the important things are said in very few. For me, this adds to the way that the Irish tell story, leaving the reader space to look between the lines. And there are fewer examples of over-explanation, which I find to be common in fiction I like less. Readers are allowed to derive meaning from the work. High context cultures are the masters of show, don't tell. Now, of course, not all Anglo cultures are low context, and culture is not black and white. There is a spectrum of context necessary. The straight-talking New Yorker is definitely low context, but Bless Your Heart Southern Charm definitely requires more context. And the same is true of the UK. Both the American South and the English South are very much middle context cultures, where someone telling you in England that your idea is interesting means they think you're very stupid. And the same spectrum exists in Ireland, where the straight-talking North has a little less need for context. They will definitely tell you what they think. Directness doesn't harm the writing necessarily, but it is something that I have noticed in reviews of Irish writing in general. There is this almost emotional minimalism, and it's something that I enjoy, as there's less of the histrionics, as my mother would say. I'm going to eat a biscuit now. So why does the conceptualisation of themselves as a nation of storytellers matter in whether Irish writers are good at writing or not? Many people are convinced they are good singers until they go on The Voice to be proved wrong. But I think that this conceptualisation of this as important to Irishness is the foundation on which the strong literary community that so many Irish writers talk about is built. And you need a strong literary community in order to build more writers. There are many training grounds for young writers in Ireland, with well-established literary journals such as The Stinging Fly, The Dublin Review, Winter Papers, Gorse and The Moth, being places where today's crop of young writers often made their start. And as Belfast writer Wendy Erskine says, when you're looking at the South, it's a whole ecosystem that goes even beyond grants and bursaries. It's festivals, it's magazines, it's that whole infrastructure that just allows people to write. As Human Barakat said in the London magazine, the Irish Writers' Centre Novel Fair has an impressive strike rate for producing debut authors. Dublin is also home to the €100,000 Dublin Literary Award, one of the world's richest literary prizes, and has been a UNESCO World City of Literature since 2010. All this means that for a young writer, there is a structure that you can join, a way you can see into becoming an author and finding your place among those Irish greats you studied at school. The Indigenous publishing scene is also considered strong for such a small nation, and many of the big British publishing houses have Irish extensions. Irish writers also describe the generosity of the community once you get started. Rachel Connolly said when she thought about Irish writers having a moment, she thought of the enormous generosity she'd experienced from other Irish writers, a good number of whom have reached out to offer help and support at various points in her career, or blurb her work, or share work. It's not the case that only Irish people do this, but her experience is that much more of them do. And Juliet Maybe, a founding publisher at the London-based One World Publishing Company, says, "The Irish writing scene is very collegiate. They support each other a lot. They help mentor each other. That in itself is something that publishers are probably aware of." Maybe edited the Booker Prize-winning book Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, and comments, "If you look at the number of endorsements from fellow Irish authors that Paul's book had on publication, he had like 7 or 8 on the cover." So for young writers, there is a place you can see yourself in the writing world, a path into publishing for you, and writers who will give you a leg up on the way. While I am sure it's not a complete idyll and very easy for new writers wanting to break into the scene, and that writers are struggling in Ireland just as they are elsewhere, this sense of community is something that many Irish writers I read for this video talk about, as it was important to them and allowed them to experiment. It gave them space to work. Of course, it's always possible to argue that whilst these points about culture and a respect for literature are all well and good, the real reason for any country's success in any arena from sports to pop music is always the same. You've got to follow the money. Whether you are talking about American domination in the Olympics or Korea's domination of pop music, there is government investment behind all of it. The Arts Council in Ireland is a better funded agency than similar agencies in other countries, such as the Arts Council in the UK. The Irish Arts Council, Culture Ireland and Literature Ireland work with artists, organisations and policymakers to support and develop the arts with information and advocacy, supporting, for example, the magazines and festivals that I mentioned up above, but also with grants, residencies and training opportunities for writers. The Next Generation Artist Award is a stipend of up to €25,000 that has previously gone to now more established writers such as Niamh Campbell and Sinead Gleeson. Culture Ireland also does work to spread the work of Irish artists outside of the country. And in literature, they are supported by Literature Ireland, which also helps to translate Irish books and cultivates a relationship with foreign publishers for things like the Frankfurt Book Fair. Ireland also has a tax-exempt status of up to €50,000 for any income made from the arts, meaning you pay no tax on your first €50,000 from writing. in Ireland, and has also launched a basic income pilot scheme, granting 2,000 artists €325 a week. The Irish government invests in the arts in the way that the British government, for example, does not. And while I'm sure the neoliberal state that is alive and well in the Irish door has probably reduced this from what it used to be, it's still a lot more than is offered elsewhere. This gives a sense of security to Irish authors who may feel more emboldened to pursue writing regardless of their financial background. And also a sense that this is a career that can actually fund you. You can afford to live as an artist. The clear disparity between the Irish government and the UK government can be seen in the north of Ireland, where the Arts Council of Northern Ireland was given a budget of 10 million for 2021 to 2022, as opposed to the 130 million assigned by the Arts Council of Ireland. Even converting from euros to pounds, and given the smaller population of the North than the Republic of Ireland, that is still over 5 times more per person. Figures from the Arts Council of Northern Ireland's response to the Northern Ireland Executive 2021 to 2022 draft budget describe the per capita spending of £5.38 in the North compared to £28 to £52 in the Republic. And this actually does show that whilst money is important, it is not the be-all and end-all of why Irish writers are having a moment. One of those Irish booker writers I mentioned earlier is Anna Burns, who is from the North. And writers such as Louise Kennedy, Michael McGee and Rachel Connolly also come from the North of Ireland. While there are not as many famous writers and books from the North as there are from the rest of Ireland, something that could be rectified by the sort of funding that comes from the Arts Council for Ireland, Northern Irish writers are not absent from this discussion, which suggests that the arguments I made about culture and a community are just as important as the arguments about money. Indeed, without a strong connection between the idea of Irishness and the idea of storytelling, would the Irish government put as much money into the Arts Council and into Irish soft power as coming from culture? And we could also argue that, aside from just the lack of funding, another reason that writers from the North are less well known and less promoted than writers from the rest of Ireland is because neither the British nor the Irish really consider or understand North. That is a horse of a different colour and a conversation for another day. Thank you for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this essay. Let me know in the comments down below your favourite Irish authors. Do you agree? Are they having a moment? I would love to discuss it with you further down below. If you are new here, my name's Roisin, and I put out new video essays every month. So I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.